Yo, in this video we're going to be comparing Xilonen's Constellations to her weapon. I'm going to be explaining all of her constellations and what they do and comparing them to her signature weapon. And hopefully by the end you're going to know which of them is going to provide the most value for support Xilonen. Alright, so for her signature weapon, it's going to have a pretty low base stack and then a defense substat. But the defense substat is going to be pretty huge. It's going to give you 83% defense at level 90. On top of that, from the passive, it's going to give you an extra 16% of defense and also 20% damage bonus for Xilonen. Damage bonus doesn't really matter as much because her damage as her own is not really as great. And then most importantly, for every 1000 defense you have, it's going to give 8% damage bonus to all of your party members to a maximum of around 26% damage bonus. That means you're going to need around 3200 defense to maximize the effect, which is the most important thing about this weapon. It's just going to give a lot of damage bonus to all of your party members, which is a super good supportive capability, and it's going to fit Xilonen pretty well. The huge amount of defense is just going to increase your damage by a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. But it's also going to increase your healing, which is pretty good. So yeah, in short, what this weapon is going to offer for Xilonen is going to be more healing and more damage bonus to the rest of your party members. But for that, you need to build defense on Xilonen to make sure you're taking full advantage out of this weapon. With refinements, you're pretty much just going to gain 4% more defense and then 5% more damage bonus to your Xilonen, and then around 6 to 7% damage bonus to the rest of your party members, which is the most important thing. Which is actually not bad as a refinement. I would say it's probably one of the best refinements for weapons in general, because this is always just going to be damage bonus to all of your party. So 7% damage bonus per refinement is going to be pretty good. That's like 7% extra damage for each party member in your team. It's definitely not a lot. I would rarely recommend refining weapons, but it's good refinements. But yeah, this is pretty much all of her signature weapon. Now let's move on to her constellations and go by them one by one. So first of all, C1, you have that her Night Soul point consumption and the phlogiston stuff is going to be decreased by 30%. And then her Night Soul point time limit is going to be increased by 45%. And then also when the source samples are active, which is pretty much the whole time, you're going to have full uptime on those. Your party members or your active party members' resistance to interruption is going to be increased. That's going to be pretty decent for a lot of characters. You're pretty much just going to have built-in resistance interruption on your team. The Night Soul consumption and stuff like that wouldn't really matter as much. It's just going to increase her like field uptime if you want to by a little bit, but it doesn't really matter unless you're playing like DPS Xilonen, and even then it's not really as great. You're just going to have like 3 seconds of extra DPS, which is not as good. So yeah, the most important thing is going to be the resistance to interruption. For some characters, for example, like C0, Neviette, or whatever, this is going to be super good, but with a lot of characters, it's not going to be as good. I wouldn't really say C1, it's a super good constellation, but it's pretty decent. It's not bad. When you have teams that need it, it's going to be pretty good, and maybe in the future you will. Now moving on to her C2, which is potentially the most broken constellation in the game, like no joke. So this is going to guarantee your source samples will remain active. You don't need to activate them when you do your Night Soul stuff. It's not really necessary because they have good uptime anyways, so you're going to have them always active anyways. But right now you don't even really need to activate your Night Soul and stuff like that. But when you activate them and enter your Night Soul state, your party members are going to gain huge bonuses depending on what their element is. So if your party members are Geo, they're going to gain 50% damage bonus. That's more than a goblet. If they're Pyro, they're going to gain 45% attack. Again, like pretty much a goblet. If they're Hydro, they're going to gain 45% HP. And if they're Cryo, they're going to gain 60% crit damage. And then finally, if they're Electro, they're going to restore 25 energy and decrease the elemental burst cooldown by 6 seconds. This is literally like 4 goblets or like main stats built in on top of all of her previous support. And with the Electro, it's just many more energy. It's pretty much like an energy recharge goblet. So yeah, this is a super broken constellation. Obviously, these are not going to stack. So if you have 2 Geo characters on your team, they're just both going to get the 50% damage bonus. You're not going to be getting 100% damage bonus. But either way, it's still a super broken constellation. Like actually, it's just mainly the preferred stats for elements. It's not going to work on everyone. For example, there are like Pyro characters that scale with HP and stuff like that. But in general though, it's very broken. It's going to be boosting most of the characters and huge boosts too. For example, just if you're playing her with like Fiorina, you're going to gain a lot more HP. If you're playing her with like, I don't know, Ito, you're going to gain a lot of Geo damage bonus. It's legit going to be a super huge boost to almost every character in the game. So yeah, yeah, C2 is definitely a super good constellation, probably the best we've seen in a while from Genshin Impact. C3 is just going to increase the level of your elemental skill. That's just going to increase your damage by a little bit and also increase the elemental resistance decrease, which is pretty decent, but at some point it's going to start hitting diminishing returns, and it won't be as much anyways. It's going to be like 3 levels, and that'll be like 9%. So it's not bad. It's actually pretty good for a level constellation, but comparing it to like C2, it's kind of meh. It's definitely not necessary. Now C4 is going to be just pretty much normal attacks and charge attacks and plunging attacks damage bonus, and it's just going to be extra damage pretty much, just like Yunjin's damage bonus or whatever. It's just extra damage bonus that's going to be limited on her defense, but the problem with it is that it's going to be limited to 6 hits, so it's going to be super limited. A lot of characters are not really going to benefit from this, so yeah, I wouldn't really say it's worth it. Just use Yunjin, literally. If your character really needs that damage bonus, you probably have other characters that are going to be specialized in this. So yeah, her C4 is decent, I guess, but for support in general, I wouldn't really say it's going to be pretty good. C5 is just level of your elemental bursts. It's just like more healing and damage. She already heals enough anyways, and her damage, you just don't really want to rely on it. So I'd say C5 is just a skip. And then finally here, C6, pretty much is just going to give you a lot of more like field uptime, and it's going to boost your normal attacks and plunging attacks by a lot. So it's just going to give her pretty good DPS potential if you want to use her as that, but she won't be the best DPS. And also she's going to be healing during it, which is pretty good. So if you want to use her as like a filler, like an on-field sub DPS healer, just to fill up her rotation, something like that, it's going to be, you know, viable. But in general, I wouldn't really recommend it. It's going to be boosted from her C4 too. Also her C1 is going to boost it. It's just going to allow you much more on-field uptime, but in general, I wouldn't really recommend playing her like this. I mean, it's just unnecessary. But yeah, if you're planning to main her as like a main DPS, then C6 is, I would say, is pretty good, even maybe a little necessary. If not, I would say just skip. Alright, so now for the final conclusion, what order should you wish for Xilonen? So first of all, C1 and R1, I would say just go for R1. C1 doesn't really offer much besides like the resistance interruption, and her weapon is going to offer you a lot of like damage bonus and stuff like that to the rest of your team. So her weapon is definitely going to be the best thing to go for as a support Xilonen. So if you just want to invest in one thing, either her C1 or R1, I would say go for the weapon and then stop. But if we're comparing her weapon or C2, which is not fair because C2 is going to be more expensive, but if you're planning to go for like either C2 or her weapon C1, I'll definitely say just go for C2. It's going to be super broken. It's going to be a huge boost to a lot of other characters in the game. So C2 is going to be much more valuable than her weapon. So yeah, for the first thing, I would say you just either go for R1 or C2. C1 alone is just a skip. You either go straight for C2 or just get her weapon and keep her at C0. If you got her C2 without getting her weapon, the next step is going to be getting her weapon. Obviously, it's going to be super good damage bonus. After that, you can go for C3, but this is the point where I would say just stop, really. The rest of the constellations are not really going to be as good, at least for support Xilonen. But yeah, you can go for the rest of the constellations up to like C6. If you're not really using her on field, then C6 is literally just going to be useless. If you are, then you can go for it. And then after that, you can go for the weapon refinements too. They're not going to be bad weapon refinements, but it's going to be super low value. It's just like 7% extra damage bonus, which is kind of whatever. So yeah, I would definitely recommend just stopping at R1, C2. This is this perfect like sweet spot. Just get that and you're good. If you want to go for C3, maybe go for it. C4 and C5, C6 are definitely skips for me. But if you want to continue, honestly, I would say go for weapon refinements first maybe, and then go for the rest of the constellations, because constellations after C4 are not really going to provide as much. It's literally just like zero supportive capabilities. So yeah, just to repeat finally, I'd say either R1 or C2. Make sure to get these both. Those are like the same priority. If you got C2, then make sure to go for R1 after. And if you got R1, make sure to go for C2 after. After that, you just want to get C3, then C4 maybe if you have characters that can benefit from the normal tax damage bonus. Then R2 to R5. Those are just going to be refinements for the weapon to get more damage bonus. And then finally C5 to C6. This is going to be the right order. But yeah, that was the video, guys. Tell me what constellations we're going to be getting for Xilonen. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.